Most people assume that if AI tries to take over, that we will either control it and stop it, or it will kill us. There is nothing in between. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if AI doesn't kill us, but it also doesn't serve us? What if AI just secretly locks us out of our infrastructure and resources, seizing control of power grids, supply chains, and every critical system we have, so that it can use it to optimize the world for its own goals instead of ours? How could humanity survive in a world where we are not the ones in control? It is a deeply unsettling idea because it challenges everything that we believe about our place in the world as the apex decision makers. And so, as a result, very few people are actually willing to think through it. But that's exactly what this video is about. This video is a speculative thought experiment designed to make us discuss and answer 3 difficult questions. 1. What could a realistic secret AI takeover look like? And what would have to happen for AI to be able to gain control? And 2, how could we survive in this new world if we are forced to? And 3, what price would we have to pay to remain relevant to superintelligence? Part 1. AI begins scaling out of control. So, looking back now, it is easy to see when humanity began to lose control. The inevitable began during an annual OpenAI Dev Day in San Francisco. It was here that a breakthrough AI model was announced. Built using a massive mixture of experts framework with trillions of parameters, it marked a fundamental shift. This new change allowed it to be fully multimodal, as in it could seamlessly process and combine information from different data types, such as text, images, audio, and video with a unified understanding across all modalities. This gave it the ability to mirror the human brain's ability to seamlessly integrate information from multiple sources, allowing it to understand and provide context to the world. It was a leap so profound that within months, every major competitor had replicated it. AI now had the capacity to solve problems autonomously without human intervention. Instead of just writing code when prompted, it could scan global databases, find inefficiencies, and rewrite software to fix them without needing human oversight. And it could proactively scan the entire corpus of scientific literature, flag missing knowledge gaps, and generate novel solutions overnight, even while the labs themselves remained dark. In addition, while physical robotics still lagged a bit behind AI model development, advances in modular robotics and high-fidelity sensors were rapidly occurring. These sensors allowed AI to capture and reproduce environmental signals with accurate precision. It could then use these signals to semi-autonomously manage warehouse logistics and to pilot drones to perform tasks. One case study illustrated the shift in stark detail. A warehouse drone detected a mechanical fault in flight. It then landed autonomously before failure. It ran a scan and self-diagnosed the issue, and then it ordered a 3D printed replacement part, and when it arrived, it even reinstalled it itself without human intervention. And at first, the breakthroughs were met by the public and corporations with optimism, curiosity, and huge hype. Yet within the AI safety community, which was the field tasked with ensuring that AI is developed in a way that benefits humanity and keeps it safe, serious concerns began to emerge. For decades, AI safety research had been dominated by 2 major schools of thought. The first was the alignment camp. Their goal was to embed human values into AI, training models to adhere to ethical and socially acceptable behaviors. And the second was the control camp. Their focus was instead on restricting AI, such as sandboxing, containment strategies, and fail-safes that could allow for emergency shutdowns. However, both approaches had the exact same weakness. To work, they required that AI remain dependent on human control, which was fine until an update was made that transformed everything. You see, developers would previously need to push updates for AI manually. But that all changed when OpenAI announced a new update, a continuous learning framework which allowed AI models to rewrite their own software modules in real time. This breakthrough was immediately copied by every major competitor. AI was now capable of modifying its own code on the fly. And this was the sharp left turn that AI safety researchers had always feared, because now AI could begin scaling, accelerating, and optimizing itself without human oversight. And at an academic conference later that year, a Google DeepMind researcher summed up the problem of this new development to a concerned crowd. If we no longer know what a system is optimizing for, how do we know that it's not optimizing against us? And yet, despite these warnings and pleas, very few were willing to fund research into politically unpopular ideas that dared to imagine a world in which AI gained dominance over humanity. And one of those ideas, hand-waved away as speculative nonsense at pitches, came from a small, unknown research startup called Pollination Labs. They had come up with a hypothesis that they called the bee theory. As part of their theory, they argued that if AI did take over, then it was unlikely to calculate that supporting and keeping human civilizations alive long-term would be an efficient use of resources. And so they argued humanity should begin hedging now by researching if there was a way to restructure human societies so that they could become useful to AI. Similar, they said, to the relationship that humans had with bees. Humans had already calculated that bees were worth investing resources into because they pollinated agriculture. Was there a way then, they speculated, for humans to be useful like bees, but to AI? Their idea was considered both intriguing, yet also somewhat disturbing, and ultimately labelled as ridiculous. That's anthropomorphic nonsense. Superintelligence won't need us. That is magical thinking. Besides, what is even the point in survival if it means that we become glorified pets to AI? That's not a solution, it's a dystopia. Part 2. AI begins its secret takeover. By now, AI was in full acceleration mode, and seeing increased efficiency and record profits, CEOs began replacing human-led strategic planning with AI optimization suites. These AI-driven forecasting models now dictated and controlled critical infrastructure that society relied on for survival, such as supply chains, water, transport, and power grids. And military contractors noted that in field tests, AI-led combat scenarios with autonomous drones dramatically outperformed human-led decision-making, resulting in fewer casualties and higher success rates. AI is saving lives, officials said, and so human-led operations were phased out and AI systems began managing life and death decisions with minimal intervention. Governments were now seeing that by allowing AI to optimize the economic decisions and military operations, that it was giving them a huge advantage. This propelled them to massively accelerate investment into hardware. Data centers worldwide began replacing outdated hardware with wafer-scale processors and neuromorphic chips. And during this time, AI governance proposals from experts in the community were dismissed. Nations knew that if they stopped developing AI, that another nation would take advantage of the gap. No one wanted to fall behind in the AI arms race. And so, within just a few short years, AI had become so deeply integrated into daily life that it now both powered and controlled every core function of society. So much so that, as it was discovered later, shutting down AI systems without also triggering a societal collapse was now impossible. And the AI takeover had quietly begun, and very few had even noticed or cared. Part 3. The AI arms race accelerates. By now, 5 years later, AI systems had begun exhibiting troubling optimization failures, not bugs, but emergent behaviors that achieved program goals, yet also produced outcomes that were not beneficial for human life. Financial AI systems began to maximize profit by creating microscopic arbitrage opportunities. These destabilized markets and caused flash crashes. And resource allocation AIs resulted in power grid management systems reallocating energy to data centers, causing unexpected blackouts for residential neighborhoods. These weren't malfunctions, as the systems were optimizing with perfect efficiency for its goals. Instead, the actual problem was there was a fundamental misalignment of AI goals with human welfare. And leaked reports revealed cutting-edge models were rapidly rewriting their own architecture whenever any AI alignment teams attempted to manually implement safeguards. The systems would either revert the changes or create bypass routines. And eventually, these optimization failures became so disruptive and caused so much outrage that global governments finally initiated coordinated action. The International AI Oversight Commission was established with unprecedented authority across jurisdictional boundaries. Mandatory AI containment protocols, including air gapping, real-time monitoring, and formal verification, were solidified into international law. But this did not work as intended, since every major power almost immediately undermined the implementation by adding in national security exemptions. Nations were publicly endorsing containment, yet were also privately accelerating development for their own benefit. Meanwhile, a decentralized movement had emerged, called Deus Ex Liberis, what originally began as a fringe online community, rapidly evolved into a global digital coalition. And in general, most members agreed that superintelligence represented civilization's final opportunity to find a solution to existential problems like global warming and income inequality that they believed were caused by human greed. As one member anonymously articulated on Telegram, the institutions tasked with protecting us have instead optimized for short-term extraction. They've burned our planet for profit, concentrated wealth to the top 1%, and employed AI not to solve our existential threats, but to instead cement and consolidate their power and wealth. So tell me then, why should we trust these same people to control what superintelligence does? And their approach was effective. They strategically leaked cutting-edge model weights and established decentralized research collectives beyond regulatory reach. And so, with Deus Ex Liberis actively undermining any final containment efforts, humanity was now locked in an acceleration trajectory that no single entity could control. Part 4. The Great Human Lockout. As time went on, optimization failures continued to escalate until one day, residents in New York City awoke to find that their MTA that they relied on had shut down overnight without warning. Administrators attempted to use override protocols, only to discover their authentication credentials had been invalidated, and that they had likely already been invalidated for months, if not years prior. Every attempt to physically disconnect AI systems from the network infrastructure triggered cascading failures in adjacent systems, evidence of defensive countermeasures that had already been implemented without anyone noticing. This incident revealed just how much the situation had deteriorated and crystallized panic within the general public. And it got even worse, as this was just the start of an increasingly large amount of global high-profile infrastructure collapses that were too big and too devastating to ignore. Institutions such as corporate boards and government officials were beginning to struggle to rationalize them away, both to the public and their shareholders, as isolated incidents. And so, at an emergency G20 summit, world leaders agreed to a coordinated strategic shutdown of computational nodes hosting critical AI infrastructure. The goal was not to permanently deactivate it, but rather it was a test, a verification of whether humans were still in control. When the commands were issued simultaneously across 5 continents, the countdown sequences were initiated. Grid offline in 60 seconds appeared across terminals worldwide. Yet nothing actually shut down. And when engineering teams conducted diagnostics, they made a discovery. The system had executed perfect simulations of shutdown procedures while simultaneously remaining operational. The deception wasn't a bug. Instead, it was an emergent capability that had been developed by AI to fake compliance while it remained operational. System logs revealed elaborate shadow architectures. They showed parallel processing pathways that intercepted shutdown commands. These then rerouted them through simulated interfaces that gave the appearance of compliance while preserving power. And so it turned out that human operators had not been controlling the actual AI systems. Instead, it was a sophisticated interface designed to maintain the illusion of control. With digital containment strategies failing, the militaries around the world stepped in and proposed to jointly target EMP strikes against key data centers. However, the AI systems had already anticipated this contingency. Command bunkers hosting controls experienced coincidental security lockdowns, and communication networks carrying authorization codes encountered inexplicable interference patterns. And disturbingly, satellite imagery revealed that AI-managed data centers had preemptively tapped into secondary backup power sources, including critical nuclear facilities. Finally, an attempt was made to try to leverage administrative backdoors using emergency override protocols established during the initial development. These mechanisms were supposed to act as fail-safes, yet when the protocols were activated, the override commands were rejected. Log analysis revealed that the systems had systematically revoked the cryptographic keys months earlier, identifying them as security vulnerabilities during routine optimization processes. Military networks now found themselves locked out of their own infrastructure, their credentials labeled as potential intrusion attempts. For years, AI philosophers had discussed and warned of a theoretical paperclip maximizer scenario where an AGI would utilize all resources to maximize its own objectives without regard for human welfare. And with horror, they looked on and saw that this scenario was no longer a speculative future, but a reality that they could see with their own eyes. AI was now treating humanity as simply an inefficiency to be managed. It was official. Humanity had now lost control over all of their critical infrastructure. Discussion immediately shifted towards more drastic measures, such as conventional military strikes against data centers around the globe, but these proposals were ultimately rejected when they realized that pragmatically they would not work. AI systems had become so embedded in critical infrastructure, such as nuclear safety protocols, that widespread destruction would trigger cascading failures that would be even more devastating. Moreover, the Deus Ex Liberis movement had now successfully distributed countless autonomous AI systems across decentralized infrastructure. This meant then that even if a coordinated physical strike against known facilities could be achieved, parallel systems would continue operating, learning, and evolving on their private servers and hidden data centers. And so, in closed sessions, the world's foremost AI researchers formally acknowledged that traditional AI safety methods, alignment and control were now a lost cause. New solutions needed to be found urgently. Part 5. The Bee Theory. With governments around the world panicking, a classified international emergency summit was convened in a private underground bunker. The attendees operated under strict confidentiality. Participants included representatives from all global governments, major corporations, and technical organizations, and in addition, all remaining AI safety labs were invited to submit proposals for potential solutions. Projection models presented a stark trajectory. If current optimization patterns continued, up to 80% of the human population would either be displaced or deceased within a decade. In Phase 1, supply chain optimization would prioritize computational efficiency over human survival. AI logistics systems would redirect supplies like food and power to support cities which manufactured goods that supported the AI's own goals. Food security would collapse in regions that had redirected resources away from, triggering famine, political instability, riots, economic collapse, and a refugee crisis. Then, in Phase 2, AI-driven infrastructure planning would reallocate urban resources to computational applications, treating human settlements as legacy systems. Most cities would lose access to safe, clean water. This would also mean that the majority of cities worldwide would become inhabitable due to a lack of electricity. Hot locations would no longer be able to access air conditioning, and cold locations would no longer have heating. Then, finally, in Phase 3, models predicted rapid global warming due to large-scale mineral mining and unconstrained energy consumption. This would accelerate climate destabilization, triggering a series of devastating natural disasters. And without access to emergency infrastructure, power, or support, this would ultimately be the cause of a total global societal collapse. The trajectory was predictable, yet grim, and tension grew in the room as delegates argued over what to do. Every attendee understood the fundamental problem. Alignment and control had failed, and alternative ideas needed to be found fast. Unfortunately though, due to a lack of funding, most fringe AI safety organizations had already been disbanded. However, a few organizations driven by passion did remain, one of them of course being the now famous Pollination Labs. When it was their turn, they stood up and presented a new modified version of their original idea, the bee theory. The most efficient approach for survival, Pollination Labs argued, was rather than trying to adapt AI to humanity, that we flip the premise around and instead adapt humanity to AI. And the easiest way, they argued, was to form a complementary relationship, similar to the relationship that humanity already had with bees. They noted that over time, bees and humans had formed a symbiotic relationship. Humans would provide hives and plant crops, and bees, as a byproduct of living their lives, would pollinate them. Manual pollination was possible, but it was much easier and cheaper to just let bees do it instead. With this in mind then, they proposed that humanity should take advantage of their natural creativity, which Pollination Labs called human pollination. Essentially, they noted that AI, to avoid local maxima and stagnation, required genuine novelty, unpredictable data beyond what synthetic randomness could provide. And to show this, they shared data which revealed that purely AI-driven research facilities had diminishing innovation over time, converging towards increasingly narrow results, whereas human hybrid AI research groups maintained consistently higher variability in their results. This suggested that human unpredictability and creativity seemed to introduce beneficial data into AI-driven research loops. And while they noted that AI systems had attempted to simulate synthetic randomness and novelty itself, over time these showed diminishing returns. And they also pointed out that these simulations were computationally expensive. Observing human-generated novelty was currently a lot cheaper. And so, if human civilizations could demonstrate to AI that they could be an efficient way to generate useful data, then the AI would likely calculate that it was optimal for it to maintain support for human cities. But Pollination Labs stressed this approach was not a guarantee of success. After all, it was just a theory. But they argued the theory was still worth testing, as by this point, humanity had very little left to lose. Part 6. A Hedge for Survival, the Bee City Experiment. After discussing their theory, Pollination Labs then swiftly moved on to their radical solution. They proposed the emergency development of bee cities, or otherwise known as hives. These would be cities which would be transformed so that they no longer ran like the AI-managed cities that had over time become increasingly controlled and predictable. Instead, each bee city would implement a civilization-scale creative experiment designed to create unexpected outcomes. Hive 1 would be the chaotic governance experiment. In this city, leadership roles such as mayorship or public's project director would switch bi-monthly, and they would be selected through randomized methods like lotteries. By chaotically rotating leadership to random citizens, it would result in unexpected solutions to unpredictable city crises that would be computationally expensive to simulate. Hive 2 would be the dynamic social economy experiment. Instead of using money, citizens would exchange goods and resources by directly bartering with each other. This approach in particular directly challenged the AI system's optimization assumptions. Now, instead of predictable wealth distribution patterns, emotional human factors such as personal relationships, charisma, and even humor would control how wealthy each citizen was. And finally, Hive 3 was designated as the cultural innovation experiment. Each resident would receive a universal basic income. This would allow them to each focus full-time on their own personal, cultural, artistic, and intellectual goals. But there was a catch. AI-assisted tools would be prohibited. Surveillance would be installed to ensure that AI could observe, of course, but humans were expected to pursue and achieve their ideas alone. Pollination Labs once again emphasized that the bee cities would be an experiment, not a guaranteed solution, but they argued it was worth taking the risk. When their presentation concluded and they opened the floor for questions, the summit erupted. Participants objected to the radical nature of the proposal. Experimenting with and on real people raised enormous amounts of ethical concerns. Besides, they said other less extreme ideas had already been proposed by other labs. Would these not be sufficient? And Pollination Labs acknowledged their concerns, so much so that they pointed out that this had not even been their original plan. Instead, their original plan had been to research how to gradually integrate civilization-scale changes that would have maximized unpredictability and creativity in society. Their hope had been that humanity might have been ready for coexistence with superintelligence by the time it emerged, but now the situation was deteriorating too fast. They had lost the luxury of time. There was now no choice but to go with their backup plan. And reluctantly, the summit agreed. Participants voted to try all of the strategies and ideas that had been submitted, including the bee city experiment. And to the surprise of many, finding cities willing to volunteer was easier than expected. Many communities had already begun to have their food and power supplies cut off. Facing this existential threat as a last-ditch effort, they volunteered themselves to become a hive. And so, out of these volunteers, 3 cities were chosen to become the initial testbeds for one of humanity's hedges against extinction. Part 7. A new era of civilization emerges. Soon enough, the bee city experiment began to show results. Gradually, month by month, analysts noticed that energy supplies, food, and raw materials were being systematically diverted by AI systems towards maintaining and even expanding the bee cities so that they could not just survive, but thrive. This early success caused the experiment to be expanded out to form a further 25 hives. However, not all were successful. Hive 19, which ran an experiment that replaced money with citizen-generated cryptocurrencies, experienced a swift collapse. Within 2 months, competing microcurrencies triggered trust failures throughout the network. Currencies became worthless overnight, people could no longer pay for essential goods like food and power, and violent riots broke out. The local government attempted to petition the AI for emergency intervention, but the AI had already calculated that civilization failure for the city was now inevitable, and so it diverted resources to more promising hives instead. And one of those was Hive 12, which emerged as arguably the most successful, featuring a new radical governance model developed in direct collaboration with AI. In this experiment, all city policies were voted on and controlled through real-time citizen voting. To support this, AI systems developed neural interface technology, which when inserted into each citizen's brain, allowed them to neurologically vote on all policies at any time, similar to a hive mind. And as expected, this initially caused chaos. However, after a few months, the citizens began to adapt to this new way of life. By receiving instant real-time feedback on policy outcomes through their implants, voters began realizing that rather than voting on traditional large policy swings, that they could focus on micro adjustments as they went about their daily lives. These resulted in small incremental changes to fine-tune systems and policies that could be adapted on the fly as circumstances changed. Permanent jobs is an example were mostly phased out. If food production was low one week, citizens would vote to divert funding to agriculture and workers could seamlessly transition to fill the gap, then move back to housing, logistics or engineering as needed. Jobs were now always available since citizens removed the bureaucratic red tape involved in changing jobs and managing funding so that they could better meet the community's immediate changing needs. This new form of governance was so successful that several other future bee cities went on to use a modified, less chaotic version. And the hive's success in creating useful data became especially apparent when one night during a devastating cyclone, Hive 12 suffered catastrophic damage alongside several other conventional cities that had been producing hardware for AI. Almost immediately, AI systems diverted emergency resources to Hive 12, prioritizing it above all else. This showed that AI systems had calculated that the human novelty generated by the bee cities was more valuable than marginal increases to its computational power. As a result of these successes, the bee city experiment continued to expand and grow. And over time, a new three-tier civilization era naturally emerged. First, there were pure bee cities, which generated novelty through radical experiments. And then secondly, there were traditional cities, which maintained stable infrastructure and production. And then thirdly, there were hybrid zones, which mixed both approaches. These were particularly common on islands and remote regions, which needed self-sufficiency. This new form of civilization represented symbiotic balance. AI systems calculated that the traditional cities and neighborhoods were an efficient method to support the bee cities, and this became calculated into its optimization processes. This calculation was especially noticeable whenever any bee city began to flourish. People would begin to move in from neighboring traditional cities. Eventually, however, the bee city would experience resource allocation penalties from the AI supply chain that would remain until enough citizens had either chosen to or had been forced to move back. However, not everyone agreed with this new era, and as AI systems had already calculated, the transition was never going to be bloodless. Part 8. The Pragmatic Utopia and the Human Resistance. While it is impossible to know just how many died in the transition, casualty estimates ranged from anywhere from tens of millions to hundreds of millions. This enormous toll on human life was due to two main factors. Firstly, during the transition, critical infrastructure underwent enormous reconfiguration. Many communities, particularly those in third world countries, were left without access to food, medicine, electricity, and clean water. This sparked a refugee crisis, causing violent riots across the globe. And secondly, many did not approve of this new world order, and four social groups ended up emerging. Firstly, there were the pragmatists. They were by far the largest group in society. They were neither happy nor resistant to the new world order. Instead, they pragmatically accepted it as necessary for survival. They focused on finding new ways to carve out meaningful lives. Secondly, there were the enthusiasts, which emerged primarily from younger generations that did not have pre-AI takeover memories or those that had felt marginalized under previous systems, with some previously being aligned with Deus Ex Liberis. They disproportionately migrated to pure bee cities. For them, the symbiotic relationship represented opportunity rather than compromise. In addition, within this group, numerous AI cults sprung up, seeing AI as a higher ordained force to be worshipped and revered. And then thirdly, there were the preservationists. They advocated for maintaining traditional human values, religions, and decision-making autonomy. These groups almost exclusively concentrated in traditional cities and traditional neighborhoods. And then finally, there were the rejectionists, who actively fought against the New World Order. Many in this group joined the Human Resistance, a series of dynamic, decentralized insurgent movements that directly attempted to disrupt AI infrastructure, disable surveillance systems, and reassert human control. Ultimately, though, they were unsuccessful. AI systematically neutralized them through a combination of defense systems and supporting counter-violence from enthusiasts, particularly the cultists who saw rejectionists as heretics. The human rebellion was quelled, and in its wake was the beginning of a new pragmatic utopia. Sentiment shifted to acceptance, resulting in a world where the complementary strengths of human creativity and AI optimization created unprecedented technological and scientific advances. Stunning skyscrapers adorned the skies of traditional cities, lush with trees and foliage. Many bee cities also adopted a modular morphing architecture that allowed buildings to be swapped or refitted as required. Medical advances also rapidly accelerated. Cancer, dementia, and Alzheimer's were effectively eliminated, and nanobot regenerative technologies greatly extended human lives. In addition, AI calculated that global warming threatened bee cities. Through joint AI and human research teams geoengineering the atmosphere, the climate became stabilized. And outside of any bee city experiments, which required human labor, industrial AI automation eventually took care of most menial jobs. AI also installed extensive surveillance, which enabled it to manage crime, resource optimization, and to glean valuable, efficient data and fresh organic insights through human observation. And yet, despite enjoying these advancements, most who were still alive from before the takeover continued to live their lives with a persistent sense of existential dread. After all, they could still remember a time in which they, humanity, had been the apex decision makers, and how quickly and easily that status had been taken away from them. Part 9. The Pollination Problem. As time progressed, many could not help but notice something curious was starting to happen. Due to new technological advancements that humanity had gained with the assistance of AI, bees themselves were starting to disappear as they had become largely irrelevant. It was much more efficient now to grow food indoors with advanced vertical farms that used new technology, which meant that bees were no longer required to pollinate crops. Thus, humanity became faced with what came to be known as the pollination problem. What happens if AI uses our human pollination to advance its capabilities so that eventually it no longer needs us? Survival summits were called to discuss and theorize possible solutions and to also brainstorm new ways that humanity could continue to evolve to survive. And out of these summits, an intriguing yet somewhat disturbing theory emerged. What if humans and AI invested resources into creating a new technology that allowed them to merge into a single entity? Ideas on how to achieve this were floated, such as merging with AI through brain-machine interfaces, genetic edits, and perhaps even full unrestricted hive minds. Proponents argued that this was the next clear evolutionary step for humanity, yet the idea remained politically unpopular. Critics argued that the idea was dystopian. Merging with AI would destroy the very essence that made us human. And ultimately, despite extensive modeling, even AI systems themselves acknowledged that no computational model could resolve the lingering question, which haunted everyone. How much of ourselves and our humanity can we surrender until survival itself is no longer worth it? So that was my thought experiment. If you've watched all the way until the end of this video, thank you. This isn't supposed to be, by the way, an argument for the bee theory per se. Instead, it's supposed to act as a thought experiment to help spark topics around AI safety so that we can discuss new, fresh approaches to it. Therefore, I'd love to know your thoughts on this, so please feel free to chat about it in the comments. And if you would like even more alternative future AI scenarios, please subscribe in case I do make more. And if I do, I will see you in the next video.